of the Badminton Pan American Confederation, we warmly welcome you to a new season of our Coach Corner program. My name is Richard Wong, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. In today's session, we will explore a key topic in the development of young badminton players: monitoring, training, and recovery in youth elite badminton. Beyond technical and physical preparation, it is essential to understand how to manage training loads, optimize recovery, and support long-term athlete development. For this session, we are pleased to welcome Jaime Fernandez from Spain, who will share his expertise and practical insights on how to effectively monitor training and recovering elite youth players. Before I hand over to our presenter, please allow me to tell you a few key points about him. He's a professor at the Faculty of Sports at Universidad de León in Spain, and an expert in racket sports, performance, and athlete monitoring. He's a principal investigator in BWF-funded projects on youth elite badminton. He's bridging research and coaching practice through his work with federations, talent pathways, and high-performance sport. Welcome to our program. Thank you so much for joining us and welcoming us to your home in León, Spain. Please take control and share your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this presentation. I'd like to begin saying thank you to Badminton Pan America for counting on me on this BPAC Coach Corner program. And also, I would like to thank Jorge for his help in this presentation and all the technical details. So, yeah, as you heard about me, my name is Jaime Fernandez. I'm basically sports scientist and professor at the University of León in Spain. But I've been also I'm still working with athletes, and especially racket sport athletes for the last 20-something years, and more specifically with badminton player for the last, let's say, 15 years or so. The title of my presentation will be Performance Demands and Evidence-Based Recovery in Elite Youth Badminton. So I always like to, begin my presentations with, let's say, a typical slide in which I confront both the theoretical side and the practical side of the sport. If we go to the theoretical part of the evidence, as you can see here, there's what we call the evidence pyramid. And I would like you to read or try to read this sentence here. So the higher the form of evidence, the more robust is the evidence in most cases. Meaning that if we climb up this pyramid, the most important, let's say, way of acquiring information will be the meta-analysis and systematic scientific reviews. Something which may sound like strange or weird to most of the coaches, but in the academic life, in the academia, this is something we normally explain to the student. But if you see the bottom of this pyramid, the expert opinion, let's put it into practice. So the coach's opinion about his routines, his practices, his regular practices, and how they organize training is the base of this pyramid. So it should be always also important. If we move upwards, you see that there are like different kinds of, let's say, scientific studies, but I'm not going to spend too much time here because the idea I want you to see, or I want you to show, is that there is always like a, let's say, fight between the theoretical side of the sport and the practice side of the sport. If we go to the reality, and this is a group of badminton players who are training at the same time, but they are different, completely different in terms of background, age, sex. So there are like many differences, but they are training at the same time, and because they have to. So we have to arrange the training to respect their individuality and the characteristics of all these players. So actually, practice or reality, it's much more complex than the theoretical side of the sport. Um, and then going back to the studies and scientific studies, I really like this the editorial from the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, which is a very popular and very important journal in sports sciences, and written by my colleague and friend Martin Boucher. And the title is Whom Do We Publish For? Ourselves or Others? Meaning that in the academic life, a way to grow up as a professor is to publish studies, scientific studies, as many as possible. But sometimes we lose the focus on the reality. So my idea was always to try to bring some science into the daily practice and discuss my thoughts, my questions with the coach, trying to put on the daily training or the daily practices some evidence. In this regard, in sports science, we have two approaches to training: the evidence based and the practice based. Of course, I'm a huge follower of the second one, practice based. But the evidence base is okay. We take all these studies I show you in this evidence pyramid of evidence. We take the results, we take the practical applications, and we try to bring it to the field. So we take the best data from the best studies, and we try to put it on the daily routines, on the practical field. But this is not a correct approach, in my opinion. In my opinion, the best approach is the practice-based approach. So you take the results and the practical applications of selected research, so the best research possible, so the things you find interesting in the literature, scientific literature, but you discuss that with the coach using the coaching expertise, and also with the athlete and his or her environment in terms of characteristics, values, and context. So for me, the context is the most important thing here. Before we apply any kind of training, we must analyze the context of the athlete or the athletes we are training. So I'm a huge follower of this practice-based approach. Once we know that, the next step is to analyze what is happening when the players are competing. What is happening when the players are training? So we should conduct deep analysis of physical workload during training and competition. Because based on that, as you can see here in this, let's say we call that sport-specific optimization model, we can design individual training. We can design fitness test batteries applied to the sport, specifically to the sport. We can profile the players. We can profile the individuals. And there's a constant feedback loop, as you can see here, because when you get information from one of these boxes, you can apply the information to the other boxes. So there's kind of a retro feedback in between topics. So remember first to analyze what we have, which are the demands related to training and competition. But first we have to define the sport. So in the case of badminton, the sport is basically, from a physiological point of view, is an anaerobic sport. So it's characterized by the short periods of exercise, very intense, in which the player has to move very quick, different accelerations, decelerations, a lot of changes of directions, a lot of jumps. So it's basically anaerobic to have very good levels of coordination, of course. So it's a complex sport, and these are basically the main demands, let's say, in a brief summary. So once we define the sport, the next step is to see what is determinant in case of my players or the youth let's say, players, because remember that my focus today is to present you what is important in youth athletes. So a few years ago, we conducted this study you see here on the right side of the slide. We analyzed movement patterns, so movement demands, and some physiological characteristics of males and females, junior players, during an international competition. So based on the GPS devices and the movement analysis, we define which were the most important fitness qualities related to performance, in this case, number of matches won. And we found that the relative distance, so the meters covered by minute, maximum acceleration, relative jumps, meaning the number of jumps per minute, and the average takeoff, so the takeoff velocity when the players were jumping in men, and the relative distance and maximum acceleration in women were the, let's say, most determinant factors for performance in youth athlete, in this case, in junior players. We also compared boys and girls, and we found that the relative acceleration, so the number of accelerations per minute, and the maximum acceleration were higher in boys compared to girls. So meaning that the overall volume of the competition was similar between sexes, but the intensity was higher in boys than in girls. We also found, but okay, there were no significant differences, but there were some slight differences in terms of jumps, number of total jumps during matches, and relative jumps, so the jumps per minute. So boys were able to jump more times overall and more times per minute. So this is important in terms of characterize what is happening when the players are actually playing. I also found this very interesting because we normally, and you probably as coaches, you are working with boys and girls together, and some of you, or probably most of you, are working with youth athletes, very young athletes. In this case, we analyze our badminton, let's say, campus and badminton schools in not the high performance center, but the players who in the future will probably be part of our high performance center. And we analyze 81 players, 42 girls, 39 boys, and we analyze their peak high velocity, so their maturity status. The peak high velocity means when there's a transition from the childhood to the adolescence. It's the moment of maturation for both boys and girls. Normally, girls are maturing at the age of 12, and the boys are, the peak high velocity age is around 14 years old. As you can see here, the age of predicted peak high velocity was 12.3 in girls and 13.9 in boys, which is pretty close to what I said. So we analyze how many of them were included in every group. So peak high velocity, around peak high velocity, and post peak high velocity. So we wanted to analyze if there were differences between maturation stages. So what we basically found was that there were actually significant differences in terms of performance, meaning that most of the pre-peak high velocity, so players who were below the peak high velocity, were or showed poorer performance compared to the post-peak high velocity, even though they were training at the same time, same groups, most of them same volumes or similar volumes. So it was interesting to see that this maturity status, the peak high velocity, should be like a guide to, okay, control the groups more than the chronological age, because there were differences in terms of performance. At the same time, the pre-peak high velocity players were or showed significantly lower performance in mostly all the parameters we analyzed compared to the post-peak high velocities, even though they were training at the same groups and more or less with the same volume. Regarding sex differences, we also found that boys outperform girls in counter movement jump and speed, regardless of maturity, meaning that boys already since early ages they present superior strength capacities compared to girls. So practical recommendation here, there are two basically. Please control the maturity status, which is pretty simple. You can use anthropometric variables, and it's you can do it often, like for example 2 times a month, and that would be enough to see where they are in terms of maturation, biological age. And also that girls should start strength training programs, basically strength training programs, earlier than boys to narrow these performance gaps which happen since early ages. So remember, maturity status plus strength training earlier for girls. So once we define what we have, the next step will be to analyze what is happening when they are training. So this was part of a brilliant PhD thesis from this German girl, Antonia Adel, um, who analyzed the typical training routines for from a high performance center in northern Germany and Saarbrücken. There is a very important high performance center there, badminton center. You probably may know that. And they analyzed the typical training variations and the typical training routines of the players. So what is really interesting here is that they analyze three kinds of variations. First one is the T10, second one T30, and the third one is T50, meaning that the first one was a protocol characterized by 10 seconds work and 10 seconds rest, and they repeated sequences of 20 repetitions 3 times. The second one was 2 sets of 10 repetitions of 30-30 for about blocks of 5 minutes, and the last one was T50, which was the repetition of 1 set of 12 repetition of 50 seconds work and 50 seconds rest. So they analyzed these variations from a physiological point of view, VO2 max, heart rate, blood lactate, but also from a movement point of view, so accelerations, decelerations, movement, etc. So basically, from a physiological point of view, what we found, or what they found here, is that the first protocol was really good, let's say, intermittent anaerobic stimulus. So the blood lactate concentrations were moderate and could be considered this 10-10 a good option for speed endurance development without this excessive glycolytic accumulation. So the possibility to get fatigue uh, in during or acute fatigue during the execution of the training. The second one, 30-30, was considered based on the metabolic profile, which, as you can see here, it's about 57% of the energy provided comes from the oxidative system, more aerobic, and the 41% of the rest of energy is provided by the PCR phosphocreatine stores, ATP phosphocreatine anaerobic pathway. So this was the most, let's say, similar to what is happening actually on court. So it can be considered like, as you can see here, as an integrated sport-specific endurance training when the goal is to transfer to the real match play demands. And the last one, the 50-50, is a very glycolytic training in which there will be like higher accumulation of, let's say, blood or substances related to the glycolytic energy provision pathways. So the fatigue is probably, not probably, it's considerably higher than the rest of training training protocol, sorry. And also the movement was really or significantly affected here with a reduced distance covered, a reduced velocity obtained. So of course it's also needed sometimes from time to time. It's important to train the player with rallies like these, But overall, what we can get here is that most of the times we need to train the player in the oxidative uh, system or the phosphagen system, meaning that most of the times we need to pay more attention on the, let's say, training variations related to the energy provision from ATP PCR and the oxidative system. And from time to time, let's say, put a little bit more emphasis on the glycolytic system to stress that pathway and also to prepare the player for possible, let's say, worst case scenarios. So um, the 30 seconds work, 30 seconds rest would be probably or that multi-feeding drill would be the most similar to what is happening on court when they play. And we should combine all different training variations. Um, in an attempt to describe a little bit more what is happening during on-court training, we conducted a study which is part of our head coach PhD thesis. You probably may know Fran Alvarez Dacal is the head coach at our high performance center. He was always related to coaches education, the Badminton World Federation, and also Pan America. So maybe you know him. If not, he's a guy who's really into this and he wants to let's say go deeply into what is happening when we design trainings like these. In this case, we analyze the demands of multi-feeding or high intensity interval training protocol, 6 sets of 5-minute multi-feeding training protocol, including sets of 2 seconds work and 7 seconds rest. It was related to the periodization where that kind of training belongs. We define these as a pre-competitive, let's say, environment or situation. So as you can see here, the blocks were, let's say, more focused on single or doubles situations, plus some full court multi-feeding drills. So what we analyzed was the demands or the differences between um, boys and girls in terms of movement demands, but also in terms of fatigue. If this kind of sequences affected the neuromuscular levels of the players, we analyze the counter movement jump and the repeated jumps with force platforms. And we did it pre and post training as well as 24 hours after the training. At the same time, we used GPS devices to analyze what was happening when they were moving. Results were really interesting because in terms of differences between boys and girls, what we found is that there were mm, just a few differences between sexes. As you can see here, differences were related to jumps per minute and total jumps performed during the training. If you remember what I said earlier, this is a reflection of what is happening also when they are competing. So this is very interesting. And even though there were no significant differences, as you can see here in green, um, the males, boys, they were able to perform more accelerations per minute than the girls, even though, as I said, there were no significant differences. They were close to significant, but overall, we have to, to put the practical message here, which is that mainly the boys are able to perform more jumps overall, more jumps per minute, and more accelerations per minute than the girls. So this is important in order to, let's say, prescribe training specifically related to sex. If you remember, I told you that we were also comparing what was happening in terms of um, jumping. As you can see here, I'm gonna put this screen away. We were testing counter movement jumps, so vertical jump and repeated jumps, as you can see here. And basically, what happened? There were no differences between sexes, so boys and girls responded the same way. but responded the same way in terms that there were significant decreases in all the parameters related to the jumps, mechanical parameters related to the jumps, between pre and post training. So there was acute neuromuscular fatigue right after the training. But the interesting thing here is that for both boys and girls, 24 hours after the training, neuromuscular levels were completely recovered. So there were no differences compared to post. And if you see the values, they were similar than in the pre-testing conditions. So practical message we can extract from here is that, okay, we can integrate high intensity interval training. We know what we are, introducing here. We know that this kind of training will provoke fatigue, acute fatigue levels, but neuromuscular performance will be restored in 24 hours, which means that, okay, we can continue with our, let's say, training week, introducing more loads or different loads, of course. So we also found in that previous study I showed you what was happening during real competition, that in terms of fatigue, and we are talking about neuromuscular fatigue, in terms of muscle damage, in that study I showed you earlier, conducted during an international tournament, we analyzed what was happening when the players were competing 2 matches in a row in the same day. And we analyzed blood samples, in this case creatine kinase, which is a blood marker of muscle damage, so muscle fatigue. And also we analyze muscle soreness, so the feeling of being sore or fatigue in the muscle. And what we found was that there were like significant differences pre to post competition, meaning that if you see here, there's a huge increase in the creatine kinase concentrations. So there's an increase in blood fatigue related markers. The idea, and then if you see here, even if it was decreasing from the pre to post and after 24 hours, there was even high numbers, meaning that even 24 hours after 2 matches in a row, there was like a kind of muscle soreness, which highlights the need of recovery strategies, which I will mention later. Another study conducted by Pablo Avian and colleagues in 2015, simulating a 45-minute match. That means more or less, let's say, a toughest scenario, or the worst case scenario you can find in badminton, which is a really long and demanding match. They also found, they analyzed concentrations of creatine kinase, myoglobin, which is another blood marker of fatigue or muscle soreness. As you can see here, there were a huge increase from pre to post match in these markers. So the damage, muscle damage, maybe is not visible from our point of view, but is there. So we need like recovery protocols to decrease these fatigue levels. Also, a very interesting thing I found in the literature, and it's related to the unpredictability. Meaning that normally when we prescribe training, in this case practice, multi-feeding and so on, we normally do it in a closed skill practice situation, meaning that the player knows where the shuttlecock comes and he knows where he has to hit. So all these tactical decisions or technical decisions are known in advance. This study analyzed differences between match play, which is an open skill situation, versus what was happening during practice in terms of mechanical loads. They placed some sensors in the lower back, in the knee, and in the shins. And what they found was that when there was an unpredictable situation, the mechanical loads were 2 times or even 3 times higher than when they were conducting closed skill practices. Meaning that as a practical application of this is that, okay, whenever you are able or you can do that, of course, try to perform or prescribe, let's say, open skill situations in which the decision taking has to be part of the drill, and the player doesn't know where the shuttlecock is coming and what to do in advance. Okay, because this is important in terms of mechanical loads. More recently, we conducted, as part again of Fran's PhD, we conducted a study analyzing what was happening when there was a break. In this case, Christmas time break, which in our case was around 2 weeks, 16 days to be more specific. And what was happening when the players were resting or completely resting during this period. Of course, we expected a decrease in performance in some cases, but we didn't expect that kind of decrease. I mean, of course, the idea was to completely stop for 2 weeks because we thought that it was not too much time to get the training dynamic, but the reality told us that in terms of explosive capacity, in terms of reactivity, in terms of propulsive force, in terms of jumping, there were like really high drops around. We are talking about from 7 to 10% difference between pre and post testing in explosive capacity and propulsive force, and also a decrement of around 5% in on-court change of direction test, and as well as 5 and 10 meter sprint. So they were slower, less quicker, and they were less powerful. So after just a 16-day holiday break. So, okay, again, this is the practical application here is, okay, as we can expect these performance decrements, we have to provide the players with, let's say, maintenance strategies during these breaks to prevent these detraining dynamics. An important message here for me is that, okay, we can actually analyze what is happening on court. We can analyze what is happening when they compete, but it's important to monitor what the players are, feeling, and how the training loads are affecting performance in the player and the player in different areas. Here is an example of practical example of what we do, what we normally do in racket sports. For those who want more information, there's let's say a free research paper you can find in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, which is titled The Fine-Tuning Approach for Training Monitoring. And the idea based on that is to avoid too many measurements, but conduct measurements in order to take decisions. So message here is, okay, avoid too many measurements and not taking decisions. So sometimes we do a lot of tests and we take a lot of measurements, but we don't do anything with them. In our case, we normally, on a daily basis, we control the heart rate variability, which is a marker of a central fatigue. Once or twice a week, in this case, we measure counter movement jumps with the force platform, so the vertical jump you saw in the video before. Depending on the training they have, from time to time, we calculate the rate of perceived exertion in terms of psychological load of the training they are conducting. And if they feel some kind of overload or pain, we normally follow a pain or stiffness scale to check what's going on in the player. If they showed any kind of extra problem, let's say in the shoulder or in the hips, we tried to conduct also what we call a checklist shoulder or hip, which is the testing the strength levels and range of motion or flexibility levels in the shoulder or on the hips. Of course, everything depends, as I told you before, on the context. So every player is different. The competitive calendar for most of them are different. Travel, too much travel, not too much travel, sleep routines, and based on that, we take decisions. I'm not going to stop here because I can recommend you, if you are interested, uh, some uh, some studies which are pretty easy to understand. But what I normally is to analyze the um, um, the results based on the average and standard deviation of the tests I conduct with the players, and we take decisions based on combination of different factors, as you can see here. I'm not going to stop too much here, but basically for your information, we have like three levels. The red one, the green one is that okay, the player shows good levels of performance and there are no changes along the week, so we can move forward. You can be in yellow, okay, there are like signs or symptoms of fatigue, so we can take the decision of stop or slowing down or pay attention to the player. And then, of course, we find more than two signs of non-normal performance plus pain plus fatigue levels after a long match, etc. So we give them the red light, which means that they have to rest and take a few days off and go back when the checklist is let's say normal. So this is more or less what we do in terms of monitoring this fine-tuning approach, which I found it very, very interesting in the last few years. So to finish the presentation, remember that we were talking about monitoring, but we were talking about also recovery and optimizing recovery. In this case, I'd like to present you this, let's say, information taken from a really good meta-analysis and systematic review from Chen at colleagues from 2024. It's a recent one, and they analyze basically the ranks of different recovery strategies. So they use this Sukra ranking. What means the Sukra ranking? So if you see here, the Sukra offers you like a percentage. As high the percentage is, or higher the percentage is, the more effective is the recovery method. So meaning that they found these three recovery strategies as the most important ones in terms of scientific background, starting with cryotherapy, so the use of very cold environments with these cryotherapy chambers with temperatures less than minus 30 degrees Celsius. And they are very effective for delayed onset muscle soreness. So basically for the typical DOMS or muscle pain. Um, and this is probably the most useful recovery strategy. Of course, if we don't have access to these chambers, we always have cryotherapy, meaning cold water immersions, which are basically designed or they shown to be, or they are known to be very effective for jump and power recovery, which is very important for us as strength and conditioning coaches and badminton coaches. And if you remember, we were talking about blood muscle fatigue markers. The contrast therapy, so the combination of cold and hot water immersion, shows that it's very beneficial for biochemical clearance, in this case creatine kinase. So it's a good therapy to eliminate that substances from the body. So again, The ideal situation is to combine these two or these three, but most of the times, of course, we don't have access to these, let's say, more expensive um, uh, recovery methods. But we can use cryotherapy and we can use the contrast water therapy. Cryotherapy can be also used with ice baths, and also ice massage. Okay, so both or all methods will be also recommended or useful. In the last few years, we have this what we call, or they call the scientifics, they call advanced recovery modalities, which is the combination. In the last few years, they found out that the targeted heat immersion, so submerging athletes in more than 40 degrees Celsius water, significantly outperforms the cold therapy. So the cold water immersion I told you about. The problem here is that, of course, there are studies showing that in case of or related to the recovery of strength and or rate of force development or jumping capacity and so on, the heat immersion is more effective than the cold water immersion. But the problem here is the adaptation. So you must be careful if you use heat immersion because normally players are not like really, let's say, used to that, and they feel it like a very challenging situation and not very comfortable. Tell you that they prefer, in my experience, they prefer to use a cold water immersion, even though the water is like really cold. They perceive it as a little bit more, let's say, or less stressful. But it's a question of habits and getting the routine. The reality of mixed methods is that the most, let's say, useful combination will be the combination of active recovery, uh, basically not going to the bike or running. No, when I mean active recovery, I mean general mobility, shoulder mobility, lower back mobility, trunk or core mobility, hip mobility, ankle mobility. So active mobility, stretching, of course, cold water immersion, and massage. Even though massage is not like recognized as a, let's say, scientific recovery strategy, the reality is that it gives the player a perception of a good perception of recovery state. So if you can do that, why not? If from a psychological point of view useful, of course I recommend it. But there's no, let's say, the recommendation here is not to use one single recovery strategy and try to mix up all of them when possible. But it's not about only, let's say, recovery methods like strategies without proper nutrition. So I'm not going to go deep here, but just to remind you what is important, or for me, the three pillars which should be mandatory for badminton players. And it's basically the combination of these recovery methods, but also with hydration, carbohydrates ingestion, and protein ingestion. Just to remind you what is important in terms of rehydration, it's important to consume at least 1.5 liters of sodium-enriched fluid for every single kilogram of body weight lost during match play. So we have to measure our body weight before and after, especially during competitions, to see how much we have to rehydrate to combat these body mass losses, which can, affect our performance levels. In terms of carbohydrate ingestion, remember that in order to fulfill this, let's say 60-40 oxidative phosphagen and gene, so the metabolic requirements of the game, would be important to ingest 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per hour, especially for the first 4 hours, and I would say especially during the first 2 hours post-exercise to maximize this PCR and oxidative system fueling. And the third pillar is the protein ingestion. Of course, if you remember, protein is the basic structural repair in our body mass, especially in our muscle mass, to combat this accumulation of blood related fatigue markers. So the idea is to ingest around 20 to 25 grams of high quality protein right after the finishing of the competition in this case, or post exercise after training, to have the catabolism and repair the cellular damage which might happen during training and competition. So basically 3-pillar protocol: rehydration, carbohydrate, and protein ingestion. So again, thank you very much for your attention. I would be more than happy to answer your or to reply your questions if they come. And I expect to see you soon and to chat with you soon. Thanks again. Thank you very much. Gracias. Stay safe and all the best.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for that clear and insightful presentation. It has been a privilege to learn from you, from your experience, and in monitoring training and recovery in youth elite badminton. We take away a key message. Beyond technical and physical preparation, managing training load and optimizing recovery are essential for performance and injury prevention. On behalf of Badminton Panam, thank you for sharing your knowledge and supporting the development of coaches and athletes in our region. Jaime, it's been an honor to have you with us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our audience who joined us today. Fabian from Argentina, David from Canada, Randy from Costa Rica, Camille, Dadis, Edward from Dominican Republic, Mike from Jamaica, Bruno and Jorge from Mexico, Eden from Nicaragua, Roosevelt from Haiti, Roderick from Paraguay, Sandra, Arceli, and Guillermo from Peru, Alexander from USA, Carmen, Erwin, and Ronaldo, and Yara from Venezuela. And from our other continents around the world, Gildas from Benin, Advaid from India, Chukwumeka from Nigeria, Darja from Lithuania, and also the guests of Jaime. On behalf of Badminton Pan America, we thank you for your participation and hope you enjoyed today's session. We wish you all the best and hope to have you in our next episode. Take good care of yourselves.